Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by an internationally best-selling author of four novels, one of which is her recent thriller, The Water Lies. Her books have been translated into 11 languages, and she teaches writing at the University of Southern California. That's right, it's your favorite writer and mine, Amy Meyerson. Amy, how are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you? Should I hold up the book?
Just living the dream. Yes, hold on. There it is. Hold it. Everyone can see it. That's The Water Lies. It just recently came out. Actually, can you say something? Because the way the Zoom's set up, it's only going to go to you when you say something.
Oh, yes. This is my new novel, The Water Lies, and I'll show you, there's really cool in the hardcover, there's a really amazing image of the Venice canals where the book is set on the actual book itself. So if you spill coffee on the jacket, you still get a pretty image.
So that's really cool. I feel like they don't do that necessarily with all the hardcovers. I know some of the hardcovers usually have that. Was that something? Did you request that? Well, was that a surprise when you received it?
Oh,
Did they
it's
give you a
such a
heads
nice
up?
surprise. I just like I think my daughter like slipped it off and I was like, "Wow, look what's inside." I've never had
Wow.
this is my first book with Thomas and Mercer, but yeah, I've always had very simple insides on all my other books. So, it's
Very,
fun.
very cool. All right, so let's get into just obviously we want to talk about the water lines, but usually I want to kind of jump back and kind of talk about your writing career leading up to the most recent book. Obviously, you're teaching writing now. Is that creative writing?
I'm a little bit of everything. I teach at USC and we have a standalone writing program that's independent from the English department. So I teach classes that fulfill the upper division writing requirement primarily. So I teach a class. I think of them more as like personal essay writing classes. So there's an element of creative nonfiction to it. I teach some publishing classes and then occasionally a creative writing workshop. So it's kind of all over.
Well, okay, so when you say publishing classes, like what does that entail?
So there at USC we have a graduate program. It's just for USC students. It's like an extra fifth year program that's called Literary Editing and Publishing. So it's a lot of people around LA who are in that world. And it's a really tiny program. There's like 10 to 12 students every year. And we sort of prepare them for a career in publishing. Some people want to be writers, some people decide to go to law school after, but have developed this skill of learning how to edit, similar to how a professional editor will. So it's fun. It's a nice
So
change of pace from like I also teach some mandatory classes where you get some students who are really excited to be taking a writing class and some students who are less excited to be taking a writing class.
yeah. Okay, so it's not necessarily like this for people who want to start their own literary journals. It's like more because I feel like in that instance, it's always like, marry someone who's rich because you're going to need that money
I
to
mean,
help
there is
keep it
a little
afloat for a couple
bit,
issues.
yeah, I mean, a lot of what they do in the program is create their own online magazines, or the class I teach, we create an anthology. So there is an element of that as well. But I think it comes, of course, yeah, with the caveat that it's a tough business to make money in.
Yeah. Although I think it is good though having that conversation because I always talk with other writers about how when there's workshops, it's usually on like how to write a short story or how to write a first chapter in a novel. Very few people like to discuss the business aspect for people who really want to get into writing as a career and just what those expectations are, like how to get an agent, how to read a contract, how to set money aside because you're going to have to pay taxes, stuff like that. But let's not spend too much time on that. Although, does your university, do you guys have like a literary journal?
They're not, I don't think anymore. There's like undergraduate ones, but I don't think
Hmm.
USC has. We used to have one, which was called the Southern California Review. But since that closed down, I don't think that there's any outside of the university.
Yeah.
Um, no, I don't think so. Yeah, I will just say before we move on, I think, and I talk up to my writer friends about this a lot. I think transparency is really important. It doesn't really benefit anyone if nobody has a sense of the marketplace and, what's a big advance, what's a small advance, et cetera. So with my students and also like with my writer friends, we all try to be very transparent.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, so before obviously the new book, before you got into teaching, um, like what was the very first thing? Do you remember the very first thing you did that would be considered creative? Like, I guess like what was that seed or spark that, maybe started when you were very, very young that got you to where you are now?
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, I think, I guess like a lot of people I'm discovering, I kind of always knew that I want to be a writer. I mean, well before I had a sense of what that meant, it was a dream. And I don't think I honestly really knew what it meant to be a writer until I started publishing, the reality of it anyway. But yeah, it's something that I have always wanted to do, but it wasn't until college, I think, that I realized that it had the potential of paying off, let's say. I think even now there's still obviously, I don't know, maybe not obviously, but for me, there's still doubt about, I think most writers have, a little bit of anxiety about what we put on the page. But when I was in college was the first time I really took creative writing workshops. And I remember the first semester that I applied, there were like three workshops that you could apply for on campus. And I ended up getting into all three of them, which was I mean, I couldn't take all three, but was amazing and was the first time I felt like really validated. And then I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut. And then I think it was right after that semester, there was a writing contest for like funding to do an independent writing project over the summer that I ended up winning. And it was the first and gosh, maybe the only time I've ever won anything. And so it was sort of a combination of those things that made me feel like, okay, I'm not totally insane for wanting to pursue this. It feels like something that other people are validating or encouraging me to continue through validation. So I think that that was a really big factor for me was the support I got when I was an undergrad. And then after that, after college, before I went to graduate school, I actually worked in publishing for a couple of years. I worked at a literary agency, and uh, sort of what you were saying, I realized that if I wanted to be a writer, I needed to understand the business side of it. I was never planning on pursuing a career in on the publishing side, but that was also a really, really important step in my evolution as a writer because it was the first time I realized, like, oh yeah, this is a business, and while it's a business of people who love books and love writing and love reading, at the end of the day they still need to be profitable. So they need to be publishing things that people want to read. And I think that really changed my writing a lot and sort of this cognitive shift from like what do I want to write to like what do I as a reader like to read? And that should be the kind, and if I like to read it, probably other people would like to read it too. So sort of working in publishing really shifted my focus a lot, like from myself onto the reader, I would say. And I think that was a really big part of my evolution as a writer.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to come back to the whole literary agency thing. But before that, when you were younger, what were you reading at the time where you had that sense that maybe writing is something I would like to do? Do you remember like certain authors or books that had that kind of
Yeah,
maybe
I mean,
inspiration for you?
I'm somewhat embarrassed to admit that like I think I liked
That's
writing even
okay.
before I liked reading.
Yeah.
When I was really little, I was just a slow reader. And I remember just getting like in like second grade, uh just getting really stressed out because I like wouldn't be able to finish what we had to read in the amount of time that the teachers gave us to read it in class. So I get like really stressed out around reading, even though I loved it. So it wasn't really until high school, and then I feel like it's a very standard. I feel like the first writers I liked were like uh Tom Robbins and Kurt Vonnegut and like kind of, it was like the first kind of things that I read that I was like, oh, writing can be something different. And then I started reading people like Margaret Atwood. And so I think even though, I read a lot before that when I was a kid. I did really like the Babysitter's Club books, and I really liked like this was pre-Goosebumps, but like the R.L. Stein and the Christopher Pike and like those kinds of scary teen books. But I don't think I really fell in love with reading until high school, if I'm being totally honest.
Okay. And around that time where and you mentioned before about like I think it was in college, the like winning that contest. So like, did you start writing short stories? At what point did you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the Bookshop of Yesterday your first published novel?
Yes.
And was that your first published novel or was that like your first novel?
Well, in college for my senior thesis, I tried to write a novel, uh, uninformed in like 9 months. So that my husband's always threatening to try to find that book somewhere. That was the really the only other time I tried to write a book, when I was, 21, and I knew nothing about plot. So it was a rather plotless book. But after that, I started the Bookshop of Yesterdays in grad school. And I often say it was like my first book and my second book because in the time that a lot of my friends wrote two books, I just kept reworking it. So, I worked on it for about 5 years before I found an agent. And then it was like another 3 years between the agent and the editor, before it was sent to copy edit and proofreading. So I worked on it for a really long time. So I tend to think of that as like two books in one. And I probably threw away like 2,000 pages on that book just in figuring out how to write a novel.
So then it's safe to say you're not one to outline. You just kind of sit down and kind of, start with a character or like a seed on an
Um,
idea and go from there, or has that changed over the years?
I do something in between. It's definitely evolved, and I do think every book is different and needs something different. But I have found that for me, one thing that was also really instrumental in my evolution as a writer is that after grad school, so I wrote the bookshop. I'm sort of telling two stories at once, but I wrote the Bookshop of Yesterdays, and it made me realize, like, oh, I need to know what happens in a story because the Bookshop of Yesterdays, it's a literary scavenger hunt set in a bookstore, and so it's about this woman who inherits a bookstore from her estranged uncle. And when she arrives at the bookshop, she starts to find clues around the bookstore that send her on a journey. They're like tucked into books that send her on a journey to talk to people from her family's past and kind of uncover this estrangement and like why he's leaving it to her. Um, so I did sort of outline that book by plotting out what the books were in the middle and kind of writing to each one. But for probably like two drafts, I didn't really know what the secret was in it. And so I realized from writing that book that for me, I need to know where the book starts and what happens at the end, but not sort of the middle of how to get there. And then, so after grad school, one thing that was really instrumental for me was I took a couple of TV writing classes at UCLA Extension, and they really taught me plot, like much more than graduate school did. They taught me how, and at this point, like when you would write a TV episode, it was like you'd write to commercials, which people don't do as much anymore. And so you always had to have these turns. And it was all about like bringing the viewer back. So I learned a lot about pacing. I learned a lot about plotting, and I really learned a lot about making decisions quickly. So I kind of brought all of that to the next few, I guess three, almost four books so far after my first one. Um, and so now I'm sort of somewhere in between. The other thing that I found, which is why I didn't ever pursue TV writing, is that I don't like the it doesn't work for me to have like a really, really thorough outline because then I feel like the discovery is kind of like robbed from the experience or it feels like repetitive when I'm doing it. So I don't like to plan so much that I'm not discovering while I'm writing. So what I usually do is like I'll know where it starts, I'll know where it ends, and then I'll kind of every day I write plot out like one day further towards that ending. And then after I have a draft, I do a reverse outline, and that's where I really start to like plot things to make sure they're in the right order.
A reverse outline. So how exactly does that work?
It's like you have, and I do it, sometimes I do it with books by other people. Like if I'm like, oh, something is really interesting about the way this is structured, I'll reverse outline their books too to see how it's put together. So it's just like every chapter you write, you know, like I'll go through chapter by chapter and write like what happens, how the story is advanced, what secrets are what clues are planted, what is like propelling the reader forward, what questions might be answered, and I sort of do that. So I sort of do a thorough outline, and then from there I'll like map it out like Act One, Act Two, Act Three.
Okay.
It's kind of reverse engineering a book.
Right. In my head, I thought you were going through the book backwards, reverse that way. That's
Oh
why I
no,
was like, reverse outline.
from
How's that
sorry.
work?
Yeah, no, from
No,
a
no, it totally
finished
makes sense
draft
now what you're saying. Yes.
to an outline. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's
sorry, go ahead.
I was just say that's something I asked my students to do a lot, and it was not something I'd ever thought to do in my own writing. And then on my second book, The Imperfects, my editor was like, I'm not sure the structure is quite right. I think you should make a reverse outline of it. And she tried to explain to me what it is, and I was like, I've been teaching this for years with like shorter pieces with students. I don't know. I've never thought of doing this myself. But I find it tremendously helpful because it also allows you to be see a little bit more objectively, like what's happening on the page in your own story.
Right. So the bookshop of yesterday, that you had been working at a literary agency at that point, or were you already working at the literary agency? I'm just trying to like timeline wise,
Oh,
where did the literary, and then what were you doing at the literary agency too?
so I was an assistant at a literary agency before I went to graduate school. I
Okay.
worked there for 2 years. At that point, I was only writing short stories. And I was an assistant to two agents. So I got to read the slush pile. I got to write some pitch letters. I got to edit some book projects. It was really great experience. I learned a lot. I also learned a lot about royalty statements, which now I help all my friends because they're hard to understand. But I did learn that when I was an assistant. So yeah, so I just got really exposed to the industry. I learned about how the various publishers worked with their imprints. It was a little different than it is now because it was back in the day where you had to like mail everyone. You'd have a messenger come to your office in we were on Madison Square Park. So like the messenger would come up to the office and I would hand them all these things that they would go deliver down or uptown or wherever to the other publishers. Now everything's by email, but
Yeah. Oh no, I remember out of college I had gotten my first agent, and back then, God, it doesn't seem like that long ago, but you had to essentially print out like 10 copies of your manuscript. And I sent it because either they could do it too, then it would come out of royalty. I don't know. I just decided to just send it myself. And yeah, now it's just with a click, just the book goes out, which is kind of not necessarily a great thing because I've heard from some editors that they just get them bombarded. Before, it was very much agents had to be very thoughtful on who they were sending those manuscripts to because there was a limited number of manuscripts they had of copies. Whereas to now, it's just, they just, 20 in a day or, however many.
yeah.
So, okay. So I guess at that point, and reading Slush is, I find, because I used to be a Slush reader for a magazine, very, very helpful because you would see all types of stories, all types of writings. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but at least for me, you could start telling within like the first page, sometimes like the first line or paragraph, whether or not a story was going to be worth reading. Just because, I don't know, just there was just something about it.
Yeah. And you start to see like that there's a lot of different reasons that something can be compelling. um, as well. Yes, I think it was a combination of that, like you can tell really quickly. And I think some days I would find it, I don't know, like I don't know if deflating is the right word, but just like I would feel sad because you have this like pile of people's dreams. And some of them, and there's lots of different reasons that a lot of those dreams won't be realized. And so some days it would also get me down a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's all subjective. So, sometimes it's just the one a book could get rejected by a literary agent or an editor for various reasons, not that necessarily that it's a bad book. It's just maybe timing or whatever else. So, did you have an in then when you were looking for an agent? Or at that point when you started looking for an agent, at least you kind of knew exactly from the inside how the process works. So maybe it helped you with, sending out query letters.
Yeah, it was funny when I went to, so I worked at the agency for like about 2 years, and then I went to grad school, started working on a book, and then 5 years later, started submitting to agents. So I feel like in that 7-year period between when I worked in publishing and when I started looking for an agent myself, I had like amnesia or something. I just sort of like kind of drew a blank about how the whole process worked a little bit. And the two agents I worked for, who were lovely, were like not the right fit for me. So even though I'd had this experience, it didn't really translate into me having people to send my book to. I was very fortunate, though. One of my close friends who I did meet while I was working in publishing is an editor. And so he made me a list of agents that he thought I should send my query letter to. He also helped me with my query letter, which was great. But of that list, he knew some of them and he didn't know others. And what I always tell people is that I got the same uh, response from people I had connections to and people I didn't. And I got the responses just as quickly. So I had uh, I had a pretty fortunate experience looking for an agent in that there were several people, as I was saying, some I was connected to, some I wasn't, who requested it and were interested in it quickly and who read it quickly. Even though it felt like a really long time, it was only about like a month before I signed someone with someone.
No, that is very quick. So let's get really geeky now. From what I could tell from the look inside, the Bookshop of Yesterday was written in first person past tense. Imperfects is third person present tense. Love
Mhm.
Scribe third person past tense. And The Water Lies is first person present tense. You have two different narrators.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, I don't know, like for you, like do you just have that sense immediately, like when you have that book idea, how best to tell it? You know, if it's going to be from a first person or third person point of view, if it's going to be past tense, present tense, or has there ever been times maybe where you start one way and then maybe a couple chapters in, 50 pages, 100 pages, you realize there's just something off here, and then you try something, different?
Yeah, well, I think I assume this is still true, but I'm not sure. If you come from a creative writing program, they will really teach you to write in like close third past tense, because that's kind of the traditional literary way to write. And there's kind of an allergy to present tense a lot of times, which maybe is not true now, but like for in literary fiction, which is like a lot of what you end up reading in graduate school. So I think I was like trained for third person past. And in the bookshop of yesterdays, I remember like I started in third person and then I went to first, then I went back to third, and I just kept switching back and forth. But the kind of story it was and like sort of the coming of age story, it really felt like a first person book. Um, I honestly can't remember why I decided to set the imperfects in present tense. I think I played around with past and present, and I just liked the immediacy of present. But I always knew that book I knew from the start I didn't want it to be like different first person point of views. I wanted to be able to switch like paragraph by paragraph whose perspective I was in at times. So the book does jump around a lot in terms of like you can be in the same scene and be in three different people's. I mean, it's always like paragraph by paragraph, so it's clear, but it jumps around in different perspectives a lot. And that was what I wanted in terms of like establishing this family dynamic in that book. I thought my third book, I thought I had present tense, but maybe it has past tense. I can't honestly remember. That book, I call that like my fever dream book because I wrote it, I was like racing against the clock while I was pregnant to finish it. It was also like during the pandemic when I was not getting a lot of, I think a lot of writers during the pandemic experimented more because, you weren't like going on walks with your writer friends. You weren't like meeting with people as much and casually talking about your writing. So you really got to like feel the benefits of the isolation. And then with The Water Lies, this was my first. I don't think this book is super, super genre. Here, I'll hold it up again in case there's new people. I didn't think this book was like super genre. Um, suspense. It's more like it has a little bit more, it's more character-driven psychological suspense. But I did know I was entering a new genre. Um, and I knew that the conventions of that genre were first person presence. So since it was a new world to me anyway, I didn't want to deviate too much from that. And when I started writing The Water Lies, should I tell readers what it's about or listeners about quickly?
Not yet, because I want to talk a little bit first about the Love Scribe. So
Okay.
is that kind of like you said a little bit of a, it was, is it like a sci-fi fantasy type thing? At least on Amazon, they have it listed as like one of the,
Yeah,
editors'
I
picks
think
for her
it
sci-fi
was
fantasy.
I love that book and I always like I did an event on Monday where somebody came specifically because they liked that book and I would say that book probably has my smallest but most intense readership. And I'm always heartened when somebody's like, I just love the Love Scribe. So that book it's more, I would say, like what they call fabulous. Not I hesitate to use magical realism as a term because technically that has a certain element of um political bent that mine doesn't have and is usually
Well,
Latin
can
American.
you tell us a little bit about what the book's about?
The Love Scribe?
Yes.
Yes, so it is about a woman who realizes that she has this gift where if she writes someone a short story and they read it, they instantly meet the love of their life. But finding love and staying in love are two separate things, and some of her stories start to go wrong, and she begins to question whether or not this is a gift or something else entirely. And in that time, she meets this like mysterious woman who she's working with who uh, she's having a lot of difficulty writing a story for. And so that also sort of makes her doubt her craft. So it's a book it's a lot about writing. It's also sort of a meditation on love, more so than like a love story. But it's really there's a lot of like stories within stories. I think it's a really transportive book. It was for me writing it, but it's definitely more like fable-like than sci-fi or fantasy.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, all right. So, yeah. So, leading into The Water Lies is your fourth novel. Now, between The Bookshop of Yesterday and The Water Lies, had you written any other novels maybe that just didn't work out or started working on something else?
I've started and stopped some things, but I've been pretty lucky and I think also strategic in terms of not drafting a full book that didn't end up publishing. But I was working on another book before the Love Scribe came out. That was a mystery. It was like 100-year mystery set on a vineyard, which one day I will return to. The research for that book was fantastic. I just went to a lot of wine country in California. Um, so I have about 100 pages of that. I'm trying to think if I started and stopped. That was really the only project that I started and realized for like a lot of reasons it wasn't the right time to work on it.
And then you transitioned to The Water Lies. What was yeah, tell us what The Water Lies is about and then maybe kind of the seed of like what got you, because you said it's not really, I mean, at least Amazon. I mean,
No,
obviously
it's
Thomas
definitely a
Mercer
thriller.
published it.
Yeah, no, it's
I mean, they have
100%
it
a
listed
thriller.
as like a domestic thriller,
Yeah.
psychological suspense type thing.
Yes, I just think that there's some psychological suspense and thrillers that are like what I think of as like really, really genre. Like there's like a twist every
Mhm.
2 pages. And it's like the plot starts and just goes. And then there's more kind of domestic suspense that has obviously has suspense as the backbone, but is more kind of character driven.
Yeah,
Would
the
you like
publisher,
that?
one of the books that they comped it with was The Push, which I don't know. Have you read The Push?
Hmm. I
The
love that
Push is
book.
so good. It's so good. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. If you think about it, if you just step back, you're like, what is it about? Like, it's kind of a long book, but it moves so quick, which I think because it
Yeah.
was a short chapters, and it's such a brilliant ending. But I don't know. I don't want to talk about it for people who haven't read it, but it's a great book. But yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not like one of those things where it's like, you know, there's a dead body, and then every like five, every chapter it ends on a twist or a cliffhanger or whatever else.
Yeah, yeah, we were pitching it as kind of the push meets the last thing he told me. And I think it's kind of more that type of thriller, like the last thing he told me, that is definitely propulsive. But it's, it's a little bit more character and language forward than like constant twists and turns, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Um,
yeah. So can you tell us what the book is about? And then again, kind of like like how it came about.
Sure. So yeah, The Water Lies, it's about two mothers, Tessa, who is 35 and heavily pregnant and has an 18-month-old son, and Barb, who has just turned 70 and kind of been forced into retirement. And at the beginning of the novel, Tessa is in a coffee shop near her home on the Venice Beach canals. Venice used to be mostly, a lot of Venice was canals in the early 20th century. It was designed to kind of look like Venice, Italy, but a lot of it has been paved over, and all that's left is like four square rectangular blocks of canals in the middle of Venice or to the side of Venice. Um, and so and now it's like very beautiful homes. It's a big tourist attraction. So if you live there, it's kind of like living in a fishbowl in a lot of ways. But my character Tessa lives there with her family, and she and her son are at a coffee shop a few blocks away from their home. And her son is just starting to speak, but can't really communicate yet. And when he's in the coffee shop, he starts calling out to this woman who he seems to know. Tessa's never seen her before. The woman doesn't seem to know him either. And it's just this kind of awkward moment where uh, the son Jasper starts a tantrum because this woman won't give him the attention that he wants. And Tessa tries to calm him down, and she's not really able to. And so she feels like judged by everyone around her. So it's a pretty, that aspect of it, I think, is a pretty common experience for parents. So Tessa goes home. She forgets all about this until the following morning when on the canal directly outside of her house, a body surfaces of a drowned woman. And it ends up being the woman who her son recognized in the coffee shop. So she starts to panic. She's like, how did my son know this woman who died right outside our house? He obviously is unable to tell her because he can't speak yet. And so she starts to investigate what the police have already written off as an accident. She thinks there's no way that this could just be a random coincidence. Meanwhile, Barb, who lives in New Jersey, hears that her daughter across the country has gotten drunk and drowned in the canals in a terrible, tragic accident. Right away, she knows this isn't true. Her daughter has been sober for 7 years. She takes her sobriety very seriously. She knows she would not have a slip up. So Barb does not believe the accident story either. She hops on a plane to LA and also starts to try to look into to find out what happened to her daughter. So the women kind of quickly intersect and team up and together try to figure out if there's a connection and what happened if it's more than just an accident.
And do you remember the inspiration? Like, what made you decide that this was the next book you were going to write?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I wrote this book pretty quickly because I'd been thinking about it for several years before I started writing, and I got the idea in 2020 during the pandemic. At that time, I was never a huge. I mean, I'd read like Gone Girl and stuff like that, but I was never a huge thriller reader. And then during the pandemic, I just started reading and listening to a lot of thrillers. I don't know what that says, but it was yeah, and I was really drawn to ones that I thought had really interesting plots and structures and things that surprised me. And so I decided I like to create a new challenge for myself with every book, and I just really wanted to see if I could write suspense, could write a thriller. I think each of my books I've developed have more plot skills. So I felt like I was ready to take on something that was very plot heavy. Um, and then around the same time, at that time, my son was about the same age as the character in the book. I had a book event that he came to the other day, and he told everyone that he inspired the book. And I was like, only parts of it, only parts of it. Um, but I was just really struck, I think, as a writer by his language acquisition and the disconnect between like what he wanted to communicate and what he could communicate. And I just started to think about like, what if that scenario, instead of frustrating, was actually quite terrifying? Which I think is a way, at least for me, I'm realizing I ask questions in suspense books. It's like, what's the everyday version of it, and then what's the terrifying version of it. And so from there, I just, I started to think about a scenario where that might turn, yeah, really scary for a mother, for parents. And then it very quickly led me to this image of a woman floating in water. And it took me a while to get from that to the Venice canals. At first, I was living in a part of LA called Silver Lake, and there's a big lake. Well, there's a reservoir in Silver Lake, but there's a big lake in Echo Park called Echo Lake. So it's like, oh, maybe it'll be there, but it felt like the distance was too far. And then I was trying to think of like places where there was water right outside homes. And eventually I was like, oh, right, the Venice canals. They're such a cool little place. And I was like, but it seems like such an obvious place to set a book. So I started doing some research, and there have been several movies that have been set on the canals, but I realized there were no novels set there. And I was like, I love when you land on something that feels like it should already exist, but doesn't.
Yeah. I feel like a Robert Grace novel was set there, but that's more crime though. But yeah, not maybe psychological suspense. So I guess when you're writing, do you try to write so much every day? Like when you start a novel, do you try to do like, I, I guess like, do you set a goal for yourself? Like so many words a chapter, or is it just, you're happy with half a page?
Um, I I think my writing has definitely changed since having kids. Before I had kids, I mean, I had a lot more time on my hands. But I would write by time. So I would wake up in the morning, I'd have coffee and read a book for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then I'd write for 2 hours every morning. And that was really before I started writing on deadline. So, the the Love Scribe was the first book I wrote on deadline, and I had about I'm trying to think. I had like 8 months to write the first draft of that book about, um, because I sold it off just an like a 4-page treatment. And I that was when I learned to write, okay, you can't just write for 2 hours a day. You have to, if you want to finish it in a certain period of time, you have to write a certain amount of words every day. So with that book, I started writing 1,000 words a day, and I found that that worked really well. So for The Water Lies, I also did that. I wrote 1,000 words a day, and that's kind of how I write first drafts now, which helps me get to a first draft in a couple of months, a really rough first draft in a couple of months, not something I would show anyone.
So is it like a Nora Roberts vomit draft where you're just getting it out, or like when you sit down, do you go and read what you wrote the day before and maybe like edit that a little bit so it's a little bit cleaner by the time you get done?
Yeah, I would say the latter. I try not to reread too much because it's easy to just keep refining the same thing over and over again, but I always read a couple of pages. What I like to do is I like to end in the middle of a moment so that I can pick up really easily and I know what I'm going to write next. So I'll usually like read a couple paragraphs or read a page or two and then just kind of run off. And I usually write a paragraph for myself of like, here's what needs to happen next. So it's not quite, it's still not something I would show anyone, but it's usually not like a true vomit draft, I would say.
Yeah. I don't necessarily say that, psychological suspense or thrillers are formulaic, but in a way there is sort of a formula to it. So obviously you have these two characters and you're bouncing back and forth. And this is your first book. I mean, I guess your other books may have had obviously different characters, but specifically with here, you had two first person narratives. Did you just kind of know how you were going to bounce back and forth, or were there times where maybe you spent too many chapters with just one character and realized, oh, we still need to get back to, the other character?
Yeah, well, so I started the book with the character of Tessa because I had that image of like the coffee shop and then the body outside their home. And when I first started writing, I thought it was all going to be Tessa's perspective, and I realized after and I wrote a first chapter really quickly. And then I realized like it was going to feel too narrow if it was just from her perspective. And so I sort of had two choices at that point. I think the more obvious choice was to have Regina, the woman who dies, be the other character and to pull back in time and have her character like go up until the point where she, passes away, which is at the same time that Tessa's character would figure out what happened or around the same time. And I didn't want to do that. And I started thinking about, because I knew I wanted to write a book about motherhood. That was kind of the focus of this book. I was like, this is my motherhood book. And so I started to think about, well, who is this woman's mother? And how would she feel? Like what would be going on in her head to find out that her daughter supposedly drowned when perhaps she didn't. I mean, she did drown, sorry, that she accidentally drowned. When perhaps it wasn't an accident, it was something more nefarious. So I just started to think about her, and as soon as I started, the book just felt like it opened up a lot, and my ideas felt like it opened up because I had this woman who was like, one woman who's at the literal beginning of motherhood, and one woman who's at the literal end of motherhood, and I just thought that that was a really nice thing to put in conversation together. But when I started writing, the first several chapters go back and forth. I think it's like chapter 13 where we get for the first time two chapters in a row from the same character's perspective. And I knew that I didn't want it to be the whole way through like Tessa, Barb. Um, but it sort of organically works for the most part that way with a few little deviations. So I let myself deviate where I wanted to, where it felt right for the story. But there's definitely parts that were moved around between drafts, and sections and there were like a few moments where I was like, oh, I actually need this part in this other character's perspective, not this character's perspective. So I rewrote it from that angle and stuff like that. So it was kind of a evolving discovery.
Sure. And since you were now doing two characters, two point of views, first person, present tense, was there anything conscious you did to try to keep the voices separate, or was it more just the characters themselves were different and that kind of worked out to kind of make sure they were, separate?
Yeah, I mean that was one of my main challenges and concerns. And right now the book I'm working on has like 5 points of view, so it's something I'm even more concerned about. I think I did two things. I listened to a lot of thrillers on audiobooks, and I think always, but at least all the ones I've listened to, when they have more than one point of view, they have more than one narrator. And so it's interesting to hear how different characters sound because they're different voices as opposed to the language itself. But it was something I was really, really concerned about. And I tried to do little things like make sure they didn't have the same ticks and stuff like that. But I was planning on I was fully prepared when my editor read a draft and some of my friends read a draft to be like, okay, I need to make a more conscious effort to make these voices different. And then all of my readers said they had no confusion telling whose voice they were in. And I'm also not a very voicey writer. I've never been a super voicey writer. So I think it's easier to it's less when none of the characters are really voicey, in some ways it's like less essential to make them super different, if that makes sense. And I think most people's internal monologues, I mean, other than like tics and stuff, aren't especially if they have like similar levels of education, stuff like that, similar backgrounds, are not always that dramatically different. So I think there are a lot of other ways, just in perspective, in addition to voice, to differentiate the characters.
Yeah. What time is it? We got some more time left. So, okay, so you have a new book coming out. We don't want to spend, obviously, we're here to talk about The Water Lies, but you do have a book, at least it's up for pre-order right now for people who can. They should go and pre-order. It's called The Chaperones. Is that correct?
That's
Is
yes.
that the
I may or
same
may not
type?
say the title, but that's the title for now.
Okay. So, is that the same? I mean, so you seem to kind of, hop around in different genres. I mean, you've only done four books, but clearly, you like to play with different genres. Is it going to be like the same type of book as The Water Lies, or is there
Yeah,
any little thing you kind of talk about?
sure. I think of this one a little bit more as a thriller than like psychological suspense, in that there's like a story that takes off and goes. And so it's set on the Channel Islands, which there's is I think the most famous one. The Channel Islands off the coast of Ventura, California. Probably the most famous one is Catalina, which is the only one that's been like really developed. But two of the other islands are national parks. So my book is set on Santa Cruz Island, which is the most remote national park in the park system, and it's about families at a third families of a third grade at a school in Los Angeles who decide at the end of the year to go on a school camping trip, and they get to some of them have experience camping, some of them don't. They get to Santa Cruz, and almost immediately things start to go wrong.
Mm.
So it's told so with this one, like I said, I like to create a challenge. I got really into like locked door or locked room mysteries. And I wanted to see if I could write one. And I wanted to see if I could write one that felt like, there's only so many locations that create that tension. Obviously, there's been ones on islands before. Um, but I hadn't really read one that felt quite like this, like a national park and a camping trip. So yeah, so it's from five different perspectives, and it starts um, early in the morning at like 2 a.m. the morning after they arrive, when a mother realizes that her son is no longer in his tent. And in the process of going to look for these two boys who are missing, and hopefully this still stays in the story, we'll see. Two boys who have gone missing, they discover a body on the beach of the island. And so it kind of pulls back and forth between that and the day before when they arrive on the island, and you start to see all the like cracks in the relationships between the people.
Yeah. So, I mean, Amazon was nice to put up the excuse me, they were nice to put up the pre-order because obviously The Water Lies was a Amazon first read, so a lot of people were downloading the book. But that comes out later this year, or is it the beginning of next year?
I think it's scheduled for December. I don't know if we'll see what happens. It's
Okay.
still
I
working
mean,
on it.
are you like in the middle of like the developmental editor? I guess it's like it's not like it's like see it's not like it's locked yet. I guess I should say.
Yeah, no, it's still I have a draft. And I'm actually turning it in like a day or two
Hmm.
to get that first round of edits. I have already had some people read it, so it's more like a second draft than a first draft.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm trying to learn how to write a book a year.
very good. All right. So in the time remaining, what have you like read recently? What have you watched? What have you listened to that you really enjoyed and would recommend to others?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously listen to and read a lot of thrillers. There's been a couple, I've read a bunch of like sort of mom thrillers lately. There's one coming out. I'm so bad at titles of my own work too, but of other people's work. Um, hold on, I have my phone right here. Let me look at my uh well, I did just read, which is not genre, but I read Heart the Lover, which I really loved by Lily King.
Yes, I've heard a
Um,
lot of great things about that book.
Yeah, and I try to read outside of just like one genre.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's
But
important for all
yeah.
writers to do, no matter what genre you're writing in. You should always try to, yeah, definitely kind of keep a.
Yeah, and I mean, I read for two things. I read for like story and structure, and then I also read, trying to locate on my phone. I'm one of those people I listen to so many books that I like forget everything. Um, uh, and then I also like to read for language. Sometimes they're the same books, but not always. Let me think. Um, I'm drawing a blank of what I've read recently. Oh, I just read Pinky Swear by Danielle Gerard, which comes out in February. That is
Mhm.
another book that's really, really good. Um, yeah, Heart the Lover. I just started this like British mystery that's really excellent that just came out last week. That's about like a serial killer in the 80s in Yorkshire. But I'm terrible at titles, so I can't remember the name of it. And then uh we're watching Pluribus right now, which I really like. Have you seen it?
Yeah, how far up are you?
I think we have like one or two left.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's really interesting about Pluribus is kind of. it makes you appreciate Vince Gilligan in terms of I don't know if it's just like, everyone's ADHD nowadays or the way streaming is, but they will spend time on things where other shows would just like, have a character show up. Where I don't know, I mean, if you only have a couple episodes left, you probably, I forget her name, but the her friend that basically comes who where like I remember the episode opens where like basically her whole trek from wherever she was, whereas
Right.
opposed to like
Just
other
having it show
shows would
up.
just kind of have her show up,
Yeah.
but like they take the time and they kind of show the process. And I feel like a lot of viewers probably appreciate that. And same thing when it comes to like, writing too, where like, it's sometimes nice to kind of see things like how like how it's happening or like we see a character do something we don't really it is not explained immediately. We don't have to like immediately know, oh, this character is thinking this or this character is doing this, but this character is doing other stuff. Like I don't know if you ever read um David Ellis's Look Closer, where he kind of has that too, where these like characters are like doing these things and at first you're like, why are they doing these things? But of course there's a reason for all of it that all comes together at the end. But yeah, and Vince Gilligan did that great with Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. But I feel like a lot of other writers just can't do it. I don't know if they can get away with it or like the networks won't let them do it. But
I think
yeah,
there's a
no, I
lot of
really
that to
appreciate
it.
kind of like almost like a slow burn.
It is a slow burn. I like a slow burn in general. I like a slow burn in books as well. I like books. That's like kind of what I meant by not super genre. I like books that take their time to start and then kind of just like ramp up. Um, Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think like at first, I thought the first episode of Pluribus was like fantastic, and then I was like, I'm not sure about it, and then I realized like, oh, this is really really smart storytelling. I also watched recently All Her Fault, which I really liked too. And
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. Until the twist, I was not. I was kind of like, all right, well, what is this? And then kind of like when they got to the end, and it's like, okay, that's okay. But I don't know. I just kind of for like a couple episodes, I personally was kind of getting bored. I was just like, well, what's the
oh, I
big
liked it.
deal?
It's
But
the I
sometimes
liked
like a
it.
twist really does save a
Yeah,
story. But the
I
problem
liked the
is
sort of slow burn
getting
of
people to that twist.
yeah. And I know a lot of people didn't like it, but I also really liked The Beast in Me, the Claire Danes show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really
No,
liked it.
it's just, and I hate to say it, I just feel like Claire Danes, she just become a meme now. We're just like, like she's just over, like, I don't know. I've just seen it all over Instagram, like, people being like, oh my, like, like I ordered cheese on this burger. Oh my God. And then, just that over that she did kind of like, but no, it was a fun show. It was a fun show. And it was the same thing too. Obviously, it was shorter than Pluribus, but I think there was stuff too where I don't know. Like again, we don't have to be explained everything. Like those shows now where like a lot of Netflix shows do this, where they kind of assume that you're going to be like looking at your phone or like your tablet playing a game when it's on in the background, so they have to constantly just like explain what's going on. Where it's a show
Yeah.
like I started really kind of catching up on Industry, and that's a show where you really just have to pay attention to because if not, like you can get lost.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that there's a lot now that is designed for only partial attention, which I don't know, is
Yeah.
it is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah, it is what it is. And I think that's one of those things where I think like writers have had to adapt to over the years. I know that James Patterson for the longest time always got shit for, having like, really short chapters, but it works. Like I don't know if you read Chris Whitaker's All the Colors of the Dark, like, that's really thick book. I think over 200 chapters, but because they were short chapters, like it really helps you get through that book. Um, when I talked, I don't know if you'd ever discuss this with your students, but I know for me, at least personally, when I open a book, oftentimes, because again, time is money, you always look like, well, how long is this chapter? And it's like, this chapter is 40 pages? I don't know if I can start it now.
That makes sense.
But if you look at it, you're like, oh, this chapter is 3 pages. Okay. And then you're like, oh, this next chapter is 4 pages. And then before you read it, or and before you realize it, you've read 50 pages when you didn't think initially you'd have time to read 40. It's this weird psychological thing. I feel like
Yeah.
kind of it can work. I mean, at the same time, I feel like a chapter should be as long as it needs to be, but there are benefits of obviously shorter chapters.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a pacing thing. And I do think, yeah, there's not a lot of books anymore that that have long chapters like that, I don't think. I think you're
Yeah.
right. I found though, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks, that it has taught me a lot about storytelling because I listen to them in the car, I listen to them as I fall asleep. And so I'll realize I missed something and I'll rewind to go back and it'll make me realize like, oh, a lot of that wasn't necessary. So it's helped me kind of realize like the essentials and the non-essentials of storytelling too. And I think at this point, like you said, because like I don't know if it's that people are doing other things or that people's time is limited, but I think a lot of times people don't want the non-essential parts of a story.
Yeah.
Sort of
Well,
knowing
it's
which
like
one.
the Elmer Leonard rule, just leave out the stuff readers tend to skip. Um,
Yeah.
well, since you listen to a lot of audiobooks, I imagine then you kind of appreciate that. I feel, at least personally, I feel like, good writing has a nice flow to it. There's a nice rhythm. Um, it kind of shocks me sometimes how many writers out there never listen to audiobooks, which again, they don't necessarily have to listen to audiobooks, but I feel like they should still be aware. Like, do you read your stuff aloud, like when you're drafting or when you're reading it to kind of see if there's a good rhythm or flow?
If I'm stuck on a section, I do. I have this goal of like uh recording my whole book and then listening to it during the editing process, but I've never actually had enough time to do that. But I think it would be tremendously helpful. But sometimes on chapters that feel particularly tricky, I will record them, and sometimes I don't even listen to them. It's just the process of reading them aloud that gives me what I need to. But yeah, I mean, I've listened to parts of all of my audiobooks. And oftentimes I'll have to stop listening to them at some point because I'll get to a point where I'm like, oh, I wish I could change that. And I can't because it's in print. So I do think it's really valuable. And I think it's particularly valuable when you can listen to it outside of your own voice. I know there's like my agent was telling me that there's this app where you can take uh like PDFs and turn them into audio. I don't know how good the audio is for those things. Obviously, it's not as good as a real audiobook narrator. But I
Yeah.
was thinking about seeing like if that would give me something for the book I'm working on now.
I feel like I chatted with Hank Philippi Ryan recently, and I feel like she had said that she does that, where she kind of uses a program to kind of read back what she's writing to kind of see if she catches something. But it, and honestly, some of these AI things have gotten better. I don't think it's ever going to replace an actual, solid audiobook narrator because, obviously they can get new, there are things that like an audiobook narrator who knows what they're doing can get across where I feel like Steven, an AI is just not going to do.
I
But
have been advised by audiobook narrators that writers should start writing into their contracts with publishers that they want a human narrator because
yeah.
there are books that are going to or already are probably getting AI. That's a much longer conversation.
And they're probably going to have to also start writing into their contracts having a human editor because I feel like we're heading to a place there where if some publishers have already started, I don't think anything official, but I have my suspicions on a few of them who have started using, AI to try to quote unquote edit a book, which, I mean, yeah, you have like Grammarly and stuff, but there are certain things that like a human editor can really pick up that an AI, like subtext or like, certain things that,
No, it came up
just
with something.
yeah.
Yeah, this is a constant conversation I have with my students. Actually, I think one of the best ways one of my students told me that the way that he uses AI for editing is as like his cheerleader. Like when he needs a little encouragement, he goes to AI to tell him like what's working in his work. And I found that really charming. It's like, yeah, you can use I guess you can have a virtual cheerleader when
But I
you
guess
need
the
it.
question is it working? That's the main question because it's also not, it wouldn't be good for the AI to give you bad advice then to say like, oh yeah, this is working, you should keep doing it this way. And then it turns out like you just wasted your time. We could go on and on and on about, the current state of publishing and AI and everything. So the to wrap up, who if people want to stalk you online, where's the best way they could find you?
I mean, I have a website, of course, it's just amymeyerson.com where they can reach out to me directly, but I primarily use Instagram, and so just amy.meyerson. There is another Amy Meyerson without the dot who often kindly forwards things to me. Uh, but yeah, Instagram is usually, in terms of social media, where I am.
I'm surprised Instagram lets people create usernames with just a dot in between to
I know
differentiate
Gmail
them.
doesn't, but yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Well, okay. So, all right. So Instagram, Amy.Meyerson, and of course your website and the newest book again, if you want to hold it up, the Water Lies. There it is. And again, it's available as a hardcover, paperback, ebook, audiobook.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amy, thank you so much for for
Thanks.
for your
Me.
time, and thank you to everybody else for hanging out. And we'll see everybody next time. Bye.